Hello everyone, my name is Julie, and today I will be belatedly telling you about all the books I read in July. And despite me literally being a librarian and in my off time as a hobby making videos about books on the internet, I feel like I really struggle talking about books on the internet. In long recap videos where I literally have to talk about 14 books, I really feel like I struggle to put my thoughts to words, to come up with concise summaries for you, but I'm going to be practicing because practice makes perfect, and I really loved or liked a lot of these books and I want to talk to you about them. And so we're gonna practice our talking skills. Very good. And hopefully in doing so, you can find some books that you're interested in. You can kind of get a taste of my reading preferences and give me suggestions, because that's kind of what I'm trying to do here, is make a little bookish community. Like, I want to talk to you. I want to like talk books. I want to know what you love to read and tell you what I love to read, because who else am I going to tell that I read 14 books this month besides the internet? And I'm going to do this a bit of a fun way that I've seen others do here on YouTube, where we rank these books from best to worst, just based on my preferences. Obviously, everyone is entitled to their own opinions. We are going to do this chronologically though. I'm going to start with the books that I read at the beginning of the month and then go down to the books that I finished at the end of the month, obviously. But I'm also going to tell you where each book lies in a scale of 1 to 13. I did read 14 books this month. One of them is a nonfiction that I don't really feel like I should put on this scale, just because it's about pretty sensitive topics. While I'm filming, I'll be looking at my reading journal to look at some of my thoughts, my ratings, and all of that. And let's just get started. Most of these books I have here physically, either from my own physical TBR, or a lot of these are from the library. But a couple of these are just books that I read on my Kindle as a Libby book, as an ARC from NetGalley. So those I'll just put a picture up, because obviously don't have them here. But the first book I read in July was Catching Fire by Suzanne Collins. This is of course a reread. I read this as a child and I really loved it then. I really love the movie still today, and so sort of in honor of the Sunrise on the Reaping movie coming out soon, I've kind of been doing a little bit of a reread since I haven't read these since I was a child. I read Hunger Games a couple months back. I really enjoyed it. Catching Fire in my mind was always kind of my favorite just based on the movie, what I remember of the movie, and I'd say I still had a really good time with this. I still gave this book 5 stars, whether that's because of nostalgia or actual content, maybe a little bit of both to be honest. But of course in this book, this is the 75th Hunger Games, the 3rd quarter quell, in which the pool of contestants for the Hunger Games is reaped from the previous pool of victors. Of course, in book 1, we know that Peeta and Katniss win the 74th Hunger Games. So in District 12, we know that Katniss is going to be a contestant, and we know that Peeta or Haymitch are going to end up in the games. When I read this book, there was so much that I had forgotten about, so much that the movie had missed, like entire characters, side plots that are completely absent in the movie. Not to mention Madge as a character simply does not exist in this universe, which is going to be, I mean, a little problematic when we come to Sunrise on the Reaping, whatever. But honestly, those aspects of the book that I had forgotten about were so fresh and new to me that I really loved seeing some sprinkles of rebellion. One of my favorite parts of this book is the pool of tributes, the alliances that we see, Finnick, Beetee, and Wyrus. There's just so many great characters in this book, and I think Suzanne Collins is absolutely a saint for creating this beautiful book universe. I'm honestly a little bit scared to go into Mockingjay. I know as a kid I didn't love Mockingjay as much since there wasn't any content of kids killing kids in like that kind of dystopian way. It was more war-based, but now that I'm older, I think I will have a more of an appreciation for that book. In my rankings, this book landed in the number 3 spot. I don't think the nostalgia could have pushed it to number 1, just because it's a reread. It didn't feel fair, but still, top 3. This book is gonna withstand all tests of time, in my opinion. The second book I read in July was Nowhere Burning by Catriona Ward. You probably know this author from her really popular book, The Last House on Needless Street. My friend Billy is a huge fan of this author, so anytime we do book club, we end up reading one of her books. We also read Sundial by this author. Of the 3 books I read by her, this was probably my second favorite, only because I've read 3, so it's also my second least favorite. It's sort of a horror retelling of Peter Pan, in which our 2 main characters, Riley and Oliver, are kind of in a crappy situation in their home life. So they go off to this place called Nowhere, which is basically just kind of this cult of kids. So they live isolated in this mountain, but the town nearby, like they have all these rumors about these kids, what they're doing on the mountain. It's all definitely a little bit suspicious, definitely maybe like a little bit magical too, because we have a crocodile that they feed a squeaky toy to. So you hear the squeaking of the toy when the crocodile's coming, you know, obviously very reminiscent of the crocodile in Peter Pan. To get to their base, they have to take a zip line where they have to fly to nowhere instead of Neverland. This book has a couple of different POVs that in the beginning you're not really sure how some of them are relevant. At the end, you kind of have this beautiful Catch Her on Award twist where everything starts to make sense in kind of a really sad and tragic way. But before we get there, it's kind of like, why am I reading from this reporter who's trying to report on the Nowhere children? Seems kind of random. Why am I reading about this famous guy, Leaf, who is the owner of this house that the kids now live at? It all seems sort of random and thrown in. It's got these multiple timelines that you kind of have to work your way through to kind of piece everything together. While reading this book, I felt kind of so-so. The end kind of left me feeling some sort of way for a long time. The end is really sad and tragic when you find out what was the outcome of these children. What was the outcome of this girl who was really thrown the worst cards possible in life. Overall, I gave it a 3.5 stars. It wasn't my favorite book. It wasn't the worst book. That being said, I did rank it number 12 in my rankings, so it ended up being the second least favorite book of the month. That's, I think, no fault of the book and more just I read a lot of good books this month. So I would still recommend it if you like horror, if you like kind of speculative-y, creepy things. Next, I picked up The Chain by Adrian McKinty. I had pulled this in my July TBR video, and this is a really fast-paced thriller where basically from the first chapter we find out that the main character's daughter has been kidnapped. And while the kidnapper is looking for ransom money, they're also looking for something very specific. They're looking for the mother to continue the chain. The chain basically is where, to get her daughter back, she has to kidnap another child and then have that parent kidnap another child. Even once your child is no longer kidnapped, if somebody lower down the chain messes up, doesn't kidnap a child, tells the police, it can go back down the chain and you could still be in danger. It's sort of a social experiment of how much do you love your kid? Are you willing to endanger another child to get your child back? And while the beginning of this story is super, super fast-paced as we watch this mother essentially kidnap a child to get back her own, the second half of the book definitely slows down where we're looking at the person behind the chain, why they're doing it, their background, which I definitely found a little less interesting. It definitely slowed things down a little bit, but overall I did find the concept very fascinating, very fast-paced. It was super quick to get through, and I ended up giving it a 4 stars. In my ranking of all the books this month, it landed at spot number 9. Like, it wasn't bad. I really enjoyed reading it. I thought it was very fun, but it just didn't stand out as like an all-star book, you know? The next book I read was an arc of The Children by Melissa Albert, and I think this book suffered from some really, really poor marketing. I requested this book on NetGalley thinking it was one thing, I read it and it was kind of all over the place. Like, it was very genre-bending. In my head, this was marketed as kind of a horror magical realism. I think GoodReads also describes it as like a fantasy. It's just kind of all over the place. I would say this book is a very character-focused fiction book with the tiniest little bits of magical realism. In The Children, there is a very popular young adult book series that is actually about the author's 2 children. They share the same names, and so everyone kind of looks at these kids, even now that they're grown up, and thinks that, wow, you must have had such an amazing childhood, like these books about you make you seem so great, and it's kind of like this twisted sense of you are the character that your mother wrote about you. All these years later, the mother has passed away, and these children, a boy and a girl, are ready to finally talk about what their childhood actually looked like. And while Guinevere, the daughter, is kind of trying to preserve this great representation of her mother that might or might not have existed, the son is more intent on shining a light on the reality of what their childhood was like. This book is kind of told in a past and present timeline where we see that their childhoods were not all that glamorous. They were kind of left on their own a lot, and the book characters that were named after them were on all these grand adventures and were well loved, and so that just didn't really translate back to what their childhoods actually looked like. Honestly, by the end of this book, I kind of felt myself skimming through. I just kind of dragged on. It wasn't really what I expected. There was some weird magical realism elements at the end that just didn't really feel like they fit in. So unfortunately, I did rate this book a 2.5 stars, and it was the worst book I read this month. Yeah, I'm so sorry. I just think the marketing on this book was not well done. And then I read Direbound by Sable Sorensen. This is a book I read on my Kindle, so I don't have it here physically. This is a really, really generic romantasy book, to be honest. This book is essentially about Marin, whose younger sister is kidnapped by nabbers, who are essentially vampires that they've been at war with for like 500 years. And in her head, the only way to get her sister back is to join the army, to get onto the front lines. And so she goes, signs herself up for the army, army, only to find out that they are doing these trials that you can bond with a giant direwolf. These are really powerful beings, and mostly the people who bond with them are Nepo babies, like their parents bonded with the wolves, so they'll bond with the wolves. Commoners like Marin, it's very, very rare for them to bond with direwolves, and to become one of these prestigious warriors is very rare. But lo and behold, Marin is not like other girls, and she becomes a bonded. So the beginning of this book is a lot of fast-paced trials, and then we get a little bit more history on, I guess, this nation and the reality of this nation. There are some fun plot twists, although they are visible from about 100 miles away. Listen, I'm kind of in my romantasy era. I'm loving everything fantasy, magical. So I rated this 4 stars, and it ended up number 5 in my official rankings for the month. Was this the most unique thing? Absolutely not. Did it keep me entertained? Yes, it did. Like I said, in my romantasy era. Next, I read Magic Study by Maria V. Snyder. This is book 2 in the Chronicles of Ixia series. If you've been watching any of my videos, you know I'm quite obsessed with this series right now. It's about all I talk about. It being book 2 in a series will make it a little bit difficult to talk about, so I'm gonna focus more on book 1, which is Poison Study, in which our main character, Yelena, is kind of offered an out. She is set to be executed, but then is offered a position as the commander's food taster. She will be living in a lap of luxury, she will be eating the best food, but the only catch is that she will be tasting food looking for poison. Book 1 sets up a really, really sweet romance, and in book 2, we're kind of in a new location where the romantic partner isn't as readily available, but the little nuggets that we do get of romance, so sweet as always. I love it, I love it, I love it. A lot of found family in this book, a lot of growth from our character. Like, she does find herself in a lot of situations where she needs to be saved, but she's always saving herself. Like, she's just so badass. It's kind of like a damsel in distress, but also she is the one saving herself. These books are not perfect by any means, but for some reason in my head, they just click so easily. They just make so much sense. I think it's that early 2000s writing that just presto, works great for me. So this is a 5-star book for me, and it was the favorite book that I read this month. Every month I try to read at least one nonfiction book. I would like to read more, but honestly, the time gets away from me. This month I read By the Fire We Carry by Rebecca Nagle. This is a nonfiction book about the generations-long fight for native land. Honestly, it's a very discouraging and sort of a depressing look at America's history with Native people. It's a very important read, but it will have you sort of depressed as we look at Supreme Court rulings about the law of the land, of how if you committed a crime on Native land, you could not be prosecuted in America technically, so people would just be coming to these Native lands to commit crimes. It's all pretty upsetting. I think America's teachings on Native people, Native land, at least from what I remember of high school, is pretty lackluster. So it's important to kind of read up on this stuff on your own. Like I said, I will not be adding this book to my rankings just because it's nonfiction, and I'm not going to compare it to a bunch of fiction books about wolves. The next book we have is The Castaways by Lucy Clark. This is a great summer thriller. It follows 2 sisters who were supposed to get on a flight to Fiji. One of them bails after a huge fight, the other one boards the plane, but then the plane goes missing and they're not heard from for 3 years until the pilot of the plane is found living under a false identity. This is another one that uses multiple timelines very effectively. We are going back to the past of the plane crash where the older sister Lori is trying to survive the plane crash, and we are in the present timeline where Erin is trying to uncover what actually happened and if her sister is alive. It's a book that I kind of picked up randomly on a whim, but ended up quite enjoying, although my ranking doesn't really make it seem like I enjoyed it. I rated this 4 stars, but unfortunately it only ended up as number 10 in my rankings, which seems low, but I just read a lot of good books this month, so it's not low, it's just low in comparison to some of these other great books. These next 3 books I read in a reading vlog where I tried to complete my summer TBR in 1 week, starting with Book Lovers by Emily Henry. I won't go too much in depth with it. If you'd like to see more in-depth, real-time thoughts about these books, I'd recommend watching that video. Books about books like totally have my heart. I love reading about our bookish characters. Nora, who is a literary agent, Charlie, who is an editor. This is a sort of enemies to lovers, although I mean it's a contemporary romance, maybe more rivals to lovers. They are kind of both very serious about their job, and they don't get along when they first meet, but 3 years later, when they are both in a small town in North Carolina, they kind of just keep crossing paths, thus starting their bookish romance. The thing I love about this book and other Emily Henry books is that it's not just a romance, it's more woman fiction focused, where we're touching on a lot of more difficult, tough topics. Topics like where you live and how you connect with your family even when you're far apart. These are things that are all very potent in adulthood, and so I really loved reading about this character and her sister, her relationship with her job. It's a level of depth that you don't always see in a contemporary romance. This book definitely fell in the middle of my rankings this month, sitting at number 8. Then I read Chlorine by Jade Song, and this is a horror book about a young swimmer who wants to become a mermaid. Again, I reviewed this in my summer reading vlog, so go check that out. This book covers a lot of interesting aspects of being a young athlete. Our main character, Ren Yu, is a swimmer, and she's under a tremendous amount of pressure to get scholarships. Her coach, who is borderline abusive. It's just a lot of interesting topics. As someone who was not a student athlete, listen, look at these noodle arms, I couldn't. But we just kind of see these unrealistic expectations and how that molds Ren, how she kind of is trying to mold her body to become the perfect swimmer, to become a mermaid. It's all very unique and interesting, and I ended up giving it a 3.5 stars. And it's number 6 in my rankings for the month. The final book I read in that summer reading vlog was One True Loves by Taylor Jenkins Reid. Although, don't get it twisted, this book is not a summer book despite the cover. This is a super fast-paced romance fiction book where our main character Emma falls in love with her high school sweetheart. They get married on their 1-year anniversary. He's in a helicopter crash where he is presumed dead. So she is going through a tremendous amount of grief. She moves home and she reconnects with an old friend from high school. She's then engaged to that man, only to find out that her original husband, her original high school sweetheart, actually made it out of the plane crash alive and has been spending these last 3 years trying to get back to her. This puts her in an extremely difficult position where her 2 true loves are both there vying for her love, and she has to choose. I really loved the setup of this book where we met Emma and her 2 potential lovers, but by the second half of the book, when Jesse, the first husband, comes back, it's kind of a little bit of Emma having to choose, and it just goes through her thought process of, I love him, I love him, I love him. And I'm like, yeah, we know that. That sucks for you, but make a decision. If you watched my summer reading vlog, you know what I think should be the solution. It was not the solution she came to. This was fine for me. It's at 3 stars, and in my rankings, I put it at number 11. It just kind of felt like a nothing book for me, to be honest. And then I read one more arc. I read Fishbone Cinderella by Elizabeth Lim. I have not yet talked about this book on my channel, and this book really blew me away. It was really amazing. It had all the aspects of a book I love. Historical fiction, magical realism, all worked very well for me. I'm just reading off my GoodReads review. Fishbone Cinderella is a magical historical fiction retelling of Cinderella and its Chinese counterpart, Ye Shen. Multiple timelines perfectly display familial relationships in Chinese culture with strong focus on immigration, the weight of elders' expectations, and Chinese folklore. While the story has a happy ending, it avoids a neat and unrealistic resolution where everyone gets exactly what they want without the reality of conflict. Our main character, Yut Ying, had such a devastating and heartbreaking childhood that we read about in the first half of the book, and it really shapes how she becomes a very strict and overbearing mother in the second half of the book. Honestly, historical fictions set in Asian cultures, for some reason those countries and their histories, their cultures, their lore is just so fascinating to me. It just worked so perfectly. This was my second favorite book of the month. And then we have Pride and Prejudice by Jane Austen. Of course, this is a classic, so I don't want to bash it. Obviously, Jane Austen was such an amazing author and so ahead of her time. My problem with the book lies with the content. I just find Regency era England so terribly boring, bores me to tears, and I know this was just the time she lived in, but reading about courtship and balls and going on your daily exercise walk, like, I just find it so dreadfully boring. And I know Mr. Darcy is supposed to be so swoon-worthy, but honestly, where? I know things were different then, but where is the romance? I don't know. I'm excited to finally watch the movie for this since I have been waiting to read the book. It just kind of sat middle in the road for me. I'd say it was pretty good for a classic, but not a favorite of mine. So I rated it 4 stars and it ended up number 7 in my rankings. And finally, the last book I read this month was Billy Summers by Stephen King. This book follows our anti-hero Billy Summers, who is an assassin, but he only assassinates people that he thinks are bad, people he thinks that the world would be better off without. So in this book, we follow Billy Summers' last job, where he has to assassinate somebody on the steps of a courthouse. But to do so, he needs to assimilate with the town, and so he's there for 3 months, basically becoming a regular schmegular guy. In doing so, he becomes close with a lot of people, his neighbors, the people he works with, only for them to turn around and realize that, wow, this guy was an assassin all along. Billy Summers is a very fascinating character. He portrays several different selves, so he kind of acts stupid to a lot of people so that they think that he's worth less than he is, but he's actually a very intelligent guy. He also has this alter ego, his getaway persona, so he has built up this fake identity for himself so he can do his final job and go off and live his life. He also has his past self that he writes about his past, his very tortured past. I love a Stephen King book. There's always just so much more depth than you think there'll be. And so this ended up as my 4th favorite book of the month. So these were all the books that I read in July. Let me know what your favorite book in July was. Let me know if you've read any of these. If now you kind of want to pick up any of these, I would love to know. Thank you so much for watching. Please make sure to give this video a thumbs up and subscribe for more content. I will see you next time. Peace out, Girl Scout, and goodbye.